Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 22 of the Essential Zodiac Podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia McNulty.
And I'm Audrey Fannin.
We have a very special guest today. She's a dear friend of mine. Her name is Susannah Ravenswing. She and I will be discussing her new book about her path as a shaman called Singing to the North Wind.
It's fantastic.
It is.
Thank you.
It is. I have to say, 5 stars or whatever they do on
you.
Amazon. I don't know. I'm very excited. Susannah and I go way back, and so this is going to be an awesome episode. But first, we're going to talk about the astronomy and astrology of Yule, or the winter solstice. So that occurs on December 21st. It's the start of the Capricorn season. Now, you remember Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So, rule, follower, limitations. But when we have ideas and things like that, Saturn will help put it in a form to make it workable. Now, winter celebrations, I should say, they go back millennia. Solstice rituals date pre-Christian pagan festivals from the Scandinavian Yule to the 7-day Saturnalia festival in Rome. So here are some very interesting facts about the winter solstice and astrology that you might not have known. So we say that the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. Now, what I mean by that, it is the day with the least amount of sunlight. We still get our 24 hours, so a lot of people have asked me about that, so I thought I'd put it in there. The word solstice derives from the Latin etymology sol, which means sun, plus sistere, which means standing still. Because, back in the day, before we had telescopes and astronomers to tell us what's going on, the sun looked like it was standing still. So that's where that came from. So we are in the Northern Hemisphere. So the solstice period occurs around December 21st, sometimes the 22nd. And you might ask, well, why is there a solstice to begin with? And that is because the spinning Earth is tilted on its axis at a 23.5 degree angle. So for all you astronomy nerds out there, that's a little tidbit.
Count me in.
Oh, you like that too? Yes. You have an app too on your pad. I think that's very cool. So the opposing northern and southern regions of our planet receive more or less daylight as the Earth revolves around the sun. And this is also what gives us our 4 seasons. So from our northern hemisphere vantage point above the equator, during the winter solstice, the sun has descended to its lowest point in the sky, which corresponds to the Tropic of Capricorn latitude. Once the winter solstice concludes, the sun will appear to change direction, climbing each day to its highest latitude point, which is the Tropic of Cancer. And that occurs, of course, in the summer, and that'll be the summer solstice, which occurs in June. So one thing about astronomy, astrology, everything has a purpose. It's not something random out there. If you do a little research, you often find out, the method behind what may appear as the madness. So now solstice rituals date back to pagan festivals long before Christmas as we know it. The Romans celebrated a festival called Saturnalia, and that was their main holiday late in December. It was celebrated between December 17th and the 23rd. Saturnalia traditions were quite lusty. There was a lot of drinking and decadence and sex. Named for the god Saturn, this festival essentially commemorates the dark days of winter period as the descending sun moves through the sign of Capricorn, the sign that is ruled by Saturn. For the sun-worshipping Romans, who claimed two major illuminated solar deities, Sol and Mithras, December 25th was chosen as the day to end the festival, and it marked the triumphant return of the sun. So, for many of you pondering that date out there, back in the day, the Christian powers that be chose December 25th as the birth of Christ, keeping in line with all the other solar celebrations, sun and sun. And it was easier to sell to the people that they were trying to convert that they get to keep their holiday. But back in the day, Christmas is not how it was that we celebrate now. So is the winter solstice the start of the winter season? Well, that depends. There are two definitions of winter according to the Old Farmer's Almanac. The astronomical winter begins at the winter solstice on December 21st. The meteorological winter in the northern hemisphere begins on December 1st and ends on February 28 or 29. So to infuse your winter solstice celebration with a touch of astrology, I recommend doing something to honor the sun, lighting candles in your house. If you have a fireplace, lighting your fireplace to burn a Yule log. You could bake a Yule log. They have thousands of recipes out there. A nice hot drink like Yule wassail dates back to old fertility rites.
Wassail is the Anglo-Saxon word for be well.
There you
wassail.
go. Thank you, Susannah.
You wish someone to be well by saying wassail.
Oh,
and you raise a toast.
I like that. Oh, thank you. Thank you. You could also honor the earth itself, since Capricorn is an earth sign. And this is a nod to the nature-based roots of the solstice. Bundle up for a hike, then create a table space of the items that you collected on your hike. So, that is the astronomy and astrology of the solstice. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Susannah is going to tell us all about herself and her new book.
Keep up with all things astrology with Cindy and Essential Zodiac. She's on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Essential Zodiac, and audiograms of this podcast can be found on YouTube under Cynthia McNulty. The Essential Zodiac podcast is published on all your favorite podcast channels, but if we've missed yours, drop us a note at easypodcast@yahoo.com. And episodes are also posted on the website, essentialzodiac.com. Back to you, Cindy.
Thank you, Audrey. So, Susannah, Audrey and I welcome you to the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. You have no idea. Like I said, Susannah and I go way back together, so we're very dear friends. But Audrey and I know you very well, so as a way of introduction, so my listeners can meet you, can you give us a brief bio of yourself?
I was born in Winston-Salem and have just turned 70. I'm a wife, I'm a mother and grandmother, and I'm a Northern Tradition Shaman and elder. As an animist, I believe that all things are inspirited and should be engaged with from a place of collaboration and mutual respect. I'm also a polytheist, which means that I revere and honor multiple gods. I had a very unusual childhood. My father was a superintendent of a large state park, and so growing up in that wilderness really showed me a different way of relating to the world around me.
Yeah, I can imagine. That must have been interesting.
Well, it really made me aware that what other people call things, trees and mountains and rocks, I experienced as beings. And that was really the beginning of the sacred work that I still follow. For many years, I made my living as a sacred smith, making fine gold and silver jewelry before it was in to be a jeweler, and making sacred tools that are used in a lot of different contexts, including the the rededication of Stonehenge as a working sacred site back in the 1970s.
That's
Awesome.
amazing.
Yeah. It was wonderful to be, asked to do that. I'm also a musician and, as Cindy said, an author, and have just released my second book, Singing to the North Wind, The Calling to an Extraordinary Life. More about that a little bit later. The psychic gifts are really strong in my family, and when you have those, you either learn how to master them or they can make you a little on the crazy side.
Yes, that's very true. Yes.
And our society really doesn't provide support or context for individuals with those sorts of talents. We recognize, when somebody has a gift for mathematics or a gift for the arts, but when they have intuitive gifts, that's something that we tend to almost pathologize or deny.
Yes,
and so
that's true.
there's very little structure for people who have that aptitude to find support or to find guidance. So I flailed around initially trying to figure things out on my own. And in the 1980s, I encountered the writings of Starhawk and began to read that, and that really resonated for me. And it became apparent that there were things I could only learn working with a group of people, learning in the context of a practicing group. So I put out a prayer and eventually encountered a woman who was a Gardnerian priestess and began to study and work with her. In that era, there was a great deal of misinformation and fear and prejudice against anyone non-Christian in the Piedmont. And it felt important to me to try to educate the public, so that they didn't need to feel those things. So I wound up really stepping into the role of educating. I was one of the first people to lead any kind of public pagan ceremony in the Piedmont. Lisa Castro and I appeared on one of the first public television programs about witchcraft and what it was
I
and what it
remember
wasn't.
that. I remember that. And just to interrupt you for a second, I have so when I decided to initiate into my coven, my husband was confused, to say the least, because, it was really foreign ground for us. And the goddess smiled on me during this journey, and Susannah was offering simply a pagan 101 class and, was going to explore the very basics. And my high priestess Lisa told me about it. I told Jay about it, and he eagerly took the class.
Oh, he was a great student. He's wonderful.
I mean, he was, it allowed him to, and it was also cool because it was an objective view. Susannah was there to, of course, teach and have everybody learn, but she didn't have a personal stake in Jay and I, right? So it was very good to get that objective point of view. And he's like, oh, okay, I get it now. And that made my journey a whole lot easier. So I thank you a million times over for that one, Susannah.
Well, that desire to educate is something that really comes naturally to me. My grandmother was a college professor. Both of her daughters were educators, and so, that's just part of the family culture that I came up in. I went on to eventually help with the late Susan Wessel's found the Path of the Moon Collective, which has continued until very recently. It may still be active for all I know. These days, my husband Eric and I live in sacred partnership with the land that we call Two Trees in southern Stokes County, where I presently have my private shamanic practice. And I serve the community by healing people and healing the land. I have students and apprentices and also offer classes and public ceremonies through 18 Springs Community Healing Center in Winston-Salem.
Very cool. Very cool. So, can you explain a little bit on how being a shaman differs from someone like myself? For simplicity purposes, I identify as a witch. It's a little bit more complicated, but for simplicity. So could you get into that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. Both traditions are practices rooted in indigenous spirituality and ancient practical wisdom. Both recognize the ability of skilled practitioners to access altered states of consciousness and through that to alter shared consensual reality through will and intention.
That's a very packed sentence.
Yeah.
Would you mind unpacking that a bit for us?
You learn to master your own will and ability to visualize goals and create them through the aid of the techniques of magic, which you learn.
Very good. Mm-hmm.
So at the same time, shamanism differs because it is specifically a service profession. If I were working solely in a Norse context, you might refer to me as a sethakona or a vulva, both of which are words that mean witch, because in that culture, those were the terms for people doing the same thing that I do. But because my practice also incorporates a lot of Mongolian and Siberian elements, and those words are utterly unfamiliar to, the people who come to me.
Right.
I use the word shaman because that's what my community has acclaimed me as. And traditionally, it's not appropriate to call yourself a shaman. The people that you serve have to decide that that's the role you're filling in a community.
Right. I've heard that before. If someone calls themselves a shaman, they're not a shaman.
It can be a red flag.
Yeah, that's a red flag for you. So there you go. Another tip out there, guys.
Yeah, the word comes from a Siberian word meaning frenzy, and it's often used inappropriately. It's not a religion. It's a practice done within the context of an anchoring culture. And there's a big difference between practicing shamanic techniques and actually being a shaman. Most people claiming to be shamans use techniques out of context, and they tend to incorporate a lot of New Age and other sorts of techniques mashed in, kind of appropriated techniques and culture that really aren't appropriately combined with it. True shamanism also is really specific to Mongolia, Siberia, Southeast Asia, and some regions of the Arctic. Many cultures, such as those in Central America, some Native American peoples, people in South America, have their own wisdom and medicine traditions that some people errantly refer to as shamanism, but really they're technically not. What they are is animists.
Right. Interesting. Very interesting.
At its heart, shamanism is really about sacred reciprocity and right relationship. What I mean by that is that over time and with great care, the shaman cultivates this collaborative relationship with helping spirits that may be deities, their ancestors, or other spirits, and develop this working relationship where the spirits assist them in work that needs to be accomplished within the community.
I'll say, having visited Two Trees, your land feels rich and loved.
Oh, it very much is. And we are so fortunate to have found that particular piece of land.
Yeah, because it's hard these days to find some things. So that speaks to you. Mm-hmm. That speaks to you. So now, when we met 20 plus years ago, you were the high priestess in a Gardnerian tradition. As a way of explanation, guys, Gardnerian covens follow the teachings and traditions of Gerald Gardner and could trace their lineage back to him. And Gerald was one of the breakthrough people, along with a couple of others, who started bringing alternative spiritual practices back into the light. They had been shoved in the closet, and he and a lot of others opened that door. So what brought about the change for you to switch traditions?
Well, I've always, throughout my life, been called into a deeper relationship with the sacred. I'm a searcher. In 2001, after searching for many years, Eric and I purchased this tract of land, Two Trees, that I've spoken of near Germantown, and basically began a relationship with the land as the third partner in our marriage. And with the guidance of the land, we eventually built a small cottage. Our focus began to shift away from the local pagan community onto that process of cultivating that relationship, really listening to the land and its guidance as to how we could best live on it as good stewards. I was no longer affiliated with a coven at that point in time, and so our ceremonies began to really become increasingly spontaneous, honoring the cycles of nature instinctively in a way that the land showed us. This is a time of awakening. This is a time of preparation. This is a time of harvesting. This is a time of rest. And this is the way it was for our ancestors. They were observant,
Yes,
and their
very
practices were driven by their relationship with the natural world, for the simple reason that if they didn't pay attention to it, they didn't survive.
That is so true.
Very fundamental.
There was no question. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So as we were doing that, during that period, both of my parents passed, and we found ourselves working increasingly with our ancestral spirits. We were both of Scandinavian and Germanic and Scottish ancestry, so we were working with Celtic and Norse deities and practices, and, just doing what felt right. And that has really been the litany of my life, to learn to trust my instincts and honor that kind of higher guidance, even when everything around me said, don't do it, don't do it. To trust that. I had my trust in myself undermined a lot as a child, as many children in our culture do.
Yeah.
And so this life journey has been about reclaiming that sovereignty and that trust in myself. So by 2015, the Norse gods were really playing a strong role in my spiritual practice. And that year, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and eventually underwent surgery to remove my thyroid and some other bits and parts. That created a situation that threw my electrolytes out of balance and on the brink of death. I literally was in the process of dying, and I knew I was dying. The Norse goddess Freya appeared and surrounded me with the most wonderful, loving energy and began to take me apart and rebuild me. This is consistent with classic shamanic practice, that you undergo this dismembering and rebuilding experience. That
your cup is completely emptied.
Absolutely, and
Yes.
taken apart and rewired. And when I came up out of that, everything was in balance, and I really experienced the world around me in a different way. It was as if someone had really turned up my sensitivity significantly. That left me then challenged to try to figure out how to manage that heightened sensitivity, which was quite overwhelming.
Right.
To walk in a Walmart, forget it. There was just absolutely no way, deer in the headlights.
I don't go to the mall anymore. I just can't handle it.
Well, I owe my life to Freya, and I will serve her for the balance of my life through service to my community and to my holy powers. She's a goddess of love and passion for those who are not familiar with her. That's the way most people think of her, as this sort of sexy Nordic woman. But there's a whole lot more to her than that.
Yeah, the goddesses are multidimensional.
She's also a fierce battle goddess. She gets to choose the first third of the slain on the battlefield, even before Odin himself. She picks the first third of those to go to her hall, Sessrumnir. And interestingly, women who die in childbirth are also considered heroes and go to Freya's hall, which I love.
I love that, yes.
Because if you've given birth, that's a heroic act.
Yes.
I think the thing that has been most prominent in my relationship with her is that she really teaches and emphasizes self-esteem. She just really focuses on the reclamation of sovereignty, especially for women.
Right.
And that is so important as we deal with the force of the patriarchy in our dominant culture.
Very true.
So
Very
true.
She is the teacher of Sether, which is the Norse word for magic, and was the person that Odin even went to learn. She made him wear a skirt for a year before she was willing to teach him these powerful arts that she knew.
I like this goddess.
Yes,
I like this goddess. She's my kind of gal.
Yeah, so that is how I made my way from a Gardnerian priestess to a Northern Tradition shaman.
That's very interesting.
And I would mention that in the wake of this dying and remaking, what I wound up ultimately doing was seeking out formal apprenticeship and going through very, very rigorous training, a lot of ordeals. It was no walk in the park, and eventually initiation. Right. And I am considered an elder in the Northern Shamanism Guild at this point.
Very cool. I always find it fascinating on how we come to our spirituality. My spirituality is very important to me. When I didn't have a spiritual home, I really felt lost, and that's not a cliche. But what I've noticed is people I've talked to who identify as shamans, witch, spiritual warriors, Norse, whatever, have like this crisis in their lives. I went through a crisis in my life, certainly not as dramatic and terrifying as you did, Susannah, but the life as I knew it was in turmoil and going to implode, right? And I was raised Catholic, and when I went to my priest, because that's what we were taught to do, basically he told me I was a bad person and to leave. So I didn't get what I needed. So eventually things worked out, but I said I would never step foot in the Catholic Church again, but I needed something. So I went through all my research and everything, but I just find it fascinating that, all the pagans I've talked to have some kind of moment, that watershed moment where they're like, no, I have to find, or I have to listen to that voice.
I think it just speaks to the deficit in the spiritual traditions which are most broadly accepted in our culture.
Very true. I joke around with my high priestess all the time that I became a better Catholic when I initiated into the coven. Because you're kind of like in the congregation, you're kind of like watching a play. There are some parts for you to, repeat after, but all the mystery, all the important stuff, you're not told, it's like, well, you don't need, like, don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. So when I started initiating in Clan Calduk and getting my lessons and learning, I was like, well, that's why they did blah, blah, blah. So, but I always find that fascinating. Now, what are some of the services you offer, Susannah? What could we get from you?
Fundamentally, I'm a healer and a spiritual counselor. Clients come to me who are struggling in their lives, and I help them explore spiritual components that contribute to their life difficulties. And there can be lots and lots of different sorts of factors. I can use tools such as ceremony and divination in exploring that and opening that up. Divination is really important in my practice. While I use tarot and other familiar forms, I primarily use the Norse runes, which is 33 symbols that are inspirited, and they really work together in a very cohesive way that's not immediately accessible. People often say, oh, well, I have runes, but I can't get them to make any sense. Because you have to court them as individuals.
Right.
You have to establish friendships with them as individuals and work with them respectfully as individuals. Otherwise, they just don't play. It's that simple.
So many people don't think about their tools in that way.
Absolutely. But I'm an animist, so every one of my tools is a friend. I walk into my workspace and I honor my drums. I say good morning to my shaman's coat. I go to my altar and I greet the things that are on my altar because they aren't things, they're friends. And I could not do my work without their assistance. They empower me and they protect me and they offer me insight that I can then bring to the table with my clients. I also serve as what's called a spikana, or a medium. I go into a trance state and the holy powers are able to speak through me. I deal with problematic spirits in spaces, what some people would call ghost busting, cleansing houses, cleansing land that's had bad things on it. This is an aspect of geomancy, which, Audrey, you have experienced some of with me.
Yes, that's fascinating.
That idea that we can bring the energy in a place or a piece of land into balance in such a way that it supports the best health of those there, whether it's the people or the trees or whatever is present.
You need Susannah if there's just an icky place in your house or
Yes.
on your land.
and I've had enough follow-up feedback from clients to know that what we do together to resolve that really does make a significant difference in the space going forward. I also, as a priestess or a clergy person of any sort would, I create rites of passage. I handfast and marry people. I bless babies. I bless houses. I do funeral rites for people, officiate whatever a legitimate clergy person can in the state of North Carolina.
Right.
But in many ways, what I'm really doing is doing these things in the context of Nordic and Eurasian culture. And these are cultures that have contributed significantly to us in the West, but I think a lot of those contributions have been overlaid with, more recent things, and so they're sort of lost in the dimness of the past.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So the other really important thing that I do is I teach. I have apprentices who I work with, preparing them, because I know what it's like to have your brain rewired and then struggle to function in the world. And so part of what I'm doing is teaching them the skills they need to manage their gifts in a way that keeps them sane and thriving. Because, we joke in my tradition that psychic gifts and crazy exist on the same, teeter-totter, and the challenge is to kind of stay on the healthy end of that seesaw.
Right. If you don't have an outlet or a place you could go to say, am I crazy? I have all this going on. You do begin to doubt your sanity, right? But if there is someone you could go to, someone you respect, an elder, and they can sit you down and say, no, this is good, this is good, this is what you need to do. It's a whole different kind of situation.
And a lot of times, that's why people come to me. And what we wind up discovering is that it's not an either or. Yes, they may have gifts, but they also may need to do some deep healing work inside themselves.
Right.
And so I have a network of practitioners in the area with lots of different skills. And I am a huge fan of therapy. I've spent many years in therapy, and it has been deeply empowering and healing for me. So I know what I can and cannot help people with, and I can make suggestions about what else they might do. And a lot of times, even if you have gifts, the message from your holy powers is, deal with your own stuff first and get that out of the way so that you have a stable, grounded foundation and you're not manifesting things that you might unconsciously have issues around.
Right. And any reputable healer will not put you astray. If you need traditional pharmacology, they will suggest that, or therapy, or something else. They won't just take your money and throw some herbs on you. That is a big red flag if they do, if they discourage you from getting traditional help. I mean, I found with my own health, I combine the two.
Yes.
I have some, herbal remedies, and I also take regular medication. And I, wake up every morning and everything is cool. So that's a big red flag that you want to pay attention to out there. Now, to access Susannah's services and to take a look, you have your website.
Yes, they can find out more about my practice by going to SusannahRavenswing.com. And there's information about my background and various services that I offer. And, the question about money and this kind of work often comes up. And there's this prejudice that's been injected mostly through this New Age, fluffy bunny kind of attitude that if you're spiritual, you ought to just offer it for free. I have spent my life learning my skills. I have spent hundreds and thousands of hours learning my skills. And so my fees are, as my goddess of self-worth has directed me to do, on par with what you would pay for a good massage, a good herbalist session, or a good therapist session, because my skill, although different, is on par with those. And sometimes people, look at the fees and they go, oh my God, you charge a lot. I charge a lot because I know what I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah. No.
But it's not a lot. It's not a lot. It's
right.
It's an investment in you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I get that a lot too. They'll say to me, "Well, I could get a natal chart for $5," and I'm like, "Well, be my guest. Go right
for
ahead."
it.
Right. You get what you pay for.
Yeah, go ahead. But yeah, people don't understand the blood, sweat, and tears and training that we go through to become adept and be able to offer our services. So just like going to your dentist or your doctor, we need to make a living too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really important to me to be able to share and pass on the knowledge that I've accumulated. I've referred to myself as a spiritual archaeologist because I'm basically relearning techniques that the church actively suppressed for, thousands of years.
Yeah.
And so I think the important thing there is that I don't want what I've learned to die with me. It's important.
Sure.
And I find that is true with my colleagues and with the other elders in my tradition is that, we've had to work so hard to reclaim this knowledge, and we really want to see that it doesn't die with us. We want it to be passed on.
Yes. You also had an article published recently.
Yes. Yeah. I was really delighted to have an article included in the December issue of Sacred Hoop magazine, which is an internationally acclaimed magazine on shamanism. And the article had to do with my process of creating my shaman's coat. In my tradition, fully initiated shamans create a sacred garment that functions as both their armor, their protected armor when they're dealing with malevolent spirits, and also a sort of a battery to pull energy from. Mm-hmm. And so that article was included in Sacred Hoop, and just really tickled to have it there.
Oh, yeah, that is very cool. That is very, very cool. And now, what will your Yule celebration look like?
Well, we've mentioned the fact that a lot of our modern Christmas traditions actually have their roots in Germanic and Scandinavian traditions. I think it's important to recognize that the Norse people had no standardized practice. Everybody from one farmstead to another did something different. They did what felt right to them. They honored the deity or deities that felt right to them. And so there's no sort of standardized way of doing things. At Two Trees, we sweep out the wood stove and put a Yule log in it and dress the Yule log. And we stand for a few moments in the dark of the house, just holding hands, Eric and I, and we give thanks for all the blessings of the year that's passed. We say words about our commitments to each other in the year to come and our hopes for the year to come. And then as Eric lights the Yule log, I sing a traditional song honoring the spirit of fire called a Wayande.
Oh, nice.
I'll hail the gods and the ancestors, and then we honor them with feasting, traditionally offerings of roast pork, fruit, vegetables, and a dish called browse, which is made with barley and root vegetables and usually meat broth or stock of some sort.
That sounds good.
Then we get up before dawn the next morning and go to a sacred mountain near us to hail the return of Sol or Sunna, as we know in the Northern tradition, and we sing up the sun. We do a lot of singing in my tradition, or at least I do. Song is a really important part of how I work as a practitioner.
Yeah.
And we've done this for 30 years, going up there. So it's become, like a reset place for our year. We get up there and it's quiet and it's cold and it's still, and there's just this falling away of all the detritus of the prior year and this opening to the possibility of the year to come.
That sounds awesome.
And then, the other thing I'll be doing is leading a ceremony at 18 Springs, a public winter solstice or Yule ceremony at 18 Springs Community Healing Center on Renolda Road on Wednesday, December 21st. And that's from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. There's not any cost to participate, although we ask you to wear masks. And if you can make donations to the scholarship fund at 18 Springs, that's really appreciated. There'll be some light refreshments, and, we'll just be engaged in ceremonies honoring both dark and light.
Cool. I've had the pleasure to participate in many ceremonies that Susannah has done, and you really don't want to miss this. I mean, you will definitely get something out of it. It's magical, it really is. One last question. Tell us about your book.
The book is called Singing to the North Wind, The Calling to an Extraordinary Life, published by Vanadis Publishing. And it is really a book for those who are seekers. It's a memoir of my life journey into sacred service, and it explores the power of deep collaborative connection with nature and living one's truth. We live in a society that is inclined to put people into tidy little boxes. It's very reductive. And when you're an individual who doesn't fit neatly into those boxes, life in our culture can be very, very difficult. And I just really wanted to share my own journey as a way of giving others hope and to say, you know, it is possible to live a powerful, authentic, self-created life. So the book is available from me at sravenswing@gmail.com. It's also available through Amazon and in most bookstores. And I really hope that you will enjoy it.
I found with both of your books, the Dwergar book and Singing to the North Wind, really made me rethink some of my own rituals or process, you know, just in terms of engaging with my own creations, my own spirituality. I really appreciate them.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what it's all about.
Yes, wonderful. Well, guys, that's a wrap for today. I hope you all enjoyed our very special episode. Our next episode will be about the new moon in Capricorn, and that'll air on the 23rd. So remember, with astrology, you can chart your life's course. Bye now.
Thanks for joining us for this special episode with Northern Tradition Shaman Susannah Ravenswing. If you're in the Winston-Salem area, be sure to join her for that winter solstice Yule celebration on December 21st and learn more at her website, susannahravenswing.com. Production of the Essential Zodiac podcast is made possible in part by Patreon members. If you'd like to become a patron, visit essentialzodiac.com and click on the red Become a Patron link. Happy Yule and blessed winter solstice to you all.